Doctrine of separation of powers in India. The doctrine of separation of powers is a fundamental principle of constitutional and administrative law. It means that the powers of the government should be distributed among three separate organs: the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary, so that no single organ becomes too powerful. The doctrine aims to prevent the concentration of power, protect individual liberty, maintain the rule of law, and ensure responsible government. Although complete separation is difficult, in modern democracies, the doctrine remains an essential safeguard against arbitrary exercise of power. Legal provision. The Constitution of India does not expressly provide for a rigid separation of powers, but the doctrine is reflected in several constitutional provisions. Article 50, separation of judiciary from executive. Articles 53 and 154, executive power of the union and states. Article 79 to 122, parliament and legislative powers. Article 124 to 147, Supreme Court. Articles 214 to 231, High Courts. Article 32, 136, 141, 142, 226, and 227. These are judicial powers and judicial review. The Supreme Court has also held that separation of powers forms part of the basic structure of the Constitution. Meaning and definition. The doctrine of separation of powers means that the three organs of government should perform their respective functions independently. The legislature makes laws, the executive implements and administers laws, the judiciary interprets laws and resolves disputes. The object of the doctrine is not merely to divide powers but to ensure that each organ acts within its constitutional limits and does not interfere with the essential functions of the others. Theory of Montesquieu. The doctrine was systematically explained by the French philosopher Montesquieu in his famous work The Spirit of Laws, 1748. Montesquieu observed that concentration of legislative, executive, and judicial powers in the hands of one authority leads to tyranny and destruction of liberty. According to him, legislative powers should remain with the legislature, executive power should remain with the executive, judicial power should remain with independent courts. He believed that liberty can survive only when these powers are exercised by separate and independent authorities capable of checking one another. Essential features. The doctrine possesses the following essential features: distribution of governmental powers among three organs, functional independence of each organ, prevention of concentration of power, mutual respect among constitutional institutions, accountability through constitutional limitations, protection of individual liberty and rule of law, maintenance of constitutional balance. Separation of powers in USA. The United States Constitution provides the best example of a strict separation of powers. The legislature, Congress enacts laws, the President exercises executive powers, and the Supreme Court exercises judicial powers. Each organ functions independently and cannot ordinarily perform the essential functions of the others. However, the Constitution also establishes a system of checks and balances, such as the presidential veto, Senate confirmation of appointments, impeachment, and judicial review. Thus, the American system combines strict separation with effective constitutional control. Separation of powers in England. England does not follow a rigid doctrine of separation of powers. The British Constitution is based on the principle of parliamentary sovereignty, and there is considerable overlap among the three organs. The executive is drawn from the legislature, and ministers remain members of the parliament. Nevertheless, judicial independence has been strengthened through constitutional reforms, particularly after the Constitutional Reform Act 2005, which separated the judicial functions of the House of Lords and established the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. Therefore, England follows a functional rather than absolute separation of powers. Separation of powers in India. The Constitution of India adopts a flexible and functional separation of powers, not a rigid one. A legislature. Parliament and state legislatures enact laws, approve budgets, exercise financial control, and hold the executive accountable. B. Executive. The President, Governors, Prime Minister, Council of Ministers, and civil servants administer laws and implement governmental policies. Judiciary, the Supreme Court and High Courts interpret the Constitution, protect fundamental rights, settle disputes, and exercise judicial review over legislative and executive actions. Although these organs have separate functions, the Constitution allows limited overlap to ensure effective governance. Check and balances. The Constitution establishes a system of checks and balances to prevent misuse of power. The legislature controls the executive through questions, debates, motions of no confidence, and financial control. The executive participate in legislation through ordinance making powers, delegated legislation, and assents to bills. The judiciary exercise judicial review and make declare unconstitutional laws or executive actions void. Similarly, judges are appointed through constitutional procedures and may be removed only through impeachment, ensuring both independence and accountability. This system maintains constitutional equilibrium without insisting upon complete separation. Importance or significance. The doctrine of separation of powers protects democracy by preventing concentration of governmental authority. It promotes accountability, judicial independence, constitutional governance, and protection of fundamental rights. The doctrine strengthens the rule of law and ensures that each organ performs its constitutional duties without arbitrary interference. Criticism of the doctrine. The doctrine has also been criticized. Firstly, complete separation of power is neither practical nor possible in modern welfare state because governmental functions frequently overlap. Secondly, modern administration requires cooperation among the legislature, executive, and judiciary rather than complete isolation. Thirdly, delegated legislation, administrative tribunals, and quasi judicial authorities perform mixed functions that make strict separation impracticable. Finally, excessive rigidity may lead to administrative delays and inefficiency. Therefore, most modern constitutions, including India's, adopt a system of functional separation with checks and balances rather than absolute separation. Conclusion. The doctrine of separation of powers remains one of the fundamental principles of constitutional democracy. While Montesquieu advocated complete separation to safeguard liberty, modern constitutional systems recognize the need for cooperation among the three organs of government. India follows a balanced approach by maintaining functional separation together with constitutional checks and balances. This ensures effective administration, judicial independence, accountability, and protection of constitutional values while preventing arbitrary exercise of power.